I'm very happy to be with each of you here this evening, especially it's been a long time since I've been up here to Canada. It's been, I thought it was 3 years, but I guess it's been 4 years since I've been over here. A lot of things have happened during this time. You know, if we look at these past few years, you know, we read in the Spirit of Prophecy, it talks about the last events will be rapid ones. Do you think things were quite rapid in the last few years? You know, you take a look at some of the events that happened. You know, in the beginning of December 2019, we had arrived to Australia. I was getting ready to go to Vanuatu. This is a photo there in Vanuatu. We were holding some seminars there and of the South Pacific Union Mission. My cousin there is teaching them how to do gardening, organic gardening. And but that was a little bit later in the month. But at the beginning of the month, when I arrived, I got a chance to take a look at some beautiful, nice fires all around me. This photo is taken just up the road from where I was living, and this had burned already thousands and thousands of acres already, and it's coming there. It was just that road that is there in front there, which was my house. That was the last road for Sydney. Once it crosses that road, it's going to burn everything up. And that's where I lived on that road. A little bit earlier that day, I had been coming up to this view here. This is driving up to my house, going up to my property, and in those hills up there, to top up there in those hills, that's where I was living. Okay, so we got welcomed to Australia by forest fires, and it was all being destructive. A lot of people felt that this was the end of the world. Then I went to Vanuatu. Susan stayed there. I went to another place overseas. I came back at the beginning of February, just in time for missionary school. And of course, then I got welcomed by floods. So this is a picture of the river. By the way, that's the new bridge up there. And then down below here is the existing bridge. Of course, you can't see it there. It's not there. And they put that new bridge up there, and they said this bridge is going to solve all the problems with the water. There's not going to be flooding anymore. And this is a few days later. It was actually on the river. It had flooded that bridge already. That was the beginning of February 2020. The church is on that side of the river, and I'm on this side of the river, okay? And if I want to go to church, it takes about 4 hours to go around. Otherwise, it's less than half an hour. But the missionary school was on this side, so we were able to continue our classes as normal to go there. There was just one little bridge that I had to cross. It was kind of a little bit iffy. The other bridge that we had in Richmond, there's the bridge there. Warragamba Dam, it's there for Sydney. It was 45% full. The rain began, and at the end of one day, it was 75% full in one day. And this water's come overflowing from that dam, by the way. So from that dam, we're getting all this water. You know, before the rain came, even there was they controlled some of the fires, but you saw still fires burning everywhere. Still in the trees. The tree was still smoking. Okay, all the trees were there. Of course, when I arrived in February in Australia, the first question for me was, have you been to China? Okay, you know the story there. Obviously, coronavirus got a lot of the countries concerned around that time. Just about a month later, the United States declared a state of emergency. The borders to Canada and Mexico were closed to all non-essential travels. You remember some of these things. Soon after, California and New York closed up, and they said you can't go there unless it's absolutely necessary. About a week later, no flights were scheduled in and out of Australia. My wife barely got out of Australia. They actually held her back there and wouldn't let her cross over and leave Australia for a bit. Early 2020 it was that the confirmed case in the Roanoke area of the coronavirus. It was about 5 minutes from my home in our county. That was when it first came there. And of course, church services began to be online. In Roanoke, we did only online services for about 2 weeks, and then we started resuming in-person meetings for those who wanted to go. You know, when we talk about the flu or influenza, this is something that happens every single year. In the United States, the CDC, it estimates the number of cases. And if you look at the cases from 2010 to 2018, just before the COVID came, you find some staggering figures there. The lowest case was 2011 to 12, with 9.3 million people in the United States were affected with the influenza. Of those, 140,000 were hospitalized, and there were 12,000 deaths associated with the flu. And that was the lowest in those years. The highest was 2017, 2018, and that was estimated 45 million people were affected, 810,000 were hospitalized, and 61,000 deaths. Just to give you a little picture here, I got a chart here, and this is 2010 to 2019. And the cases in the gray at the bottom are the ones that they were affected. The maroon were hospitalized, and the top were the deaths. And if you notice, 2010, 2011 were there, and I want you to know, before that was even less, okay? But when you're looking at 2012, what do you notice on the graph? This is a CDC graph. This is not something that I made. Have you noticed something? It's huge, okay? And it goes way up, and then 2017, 2018, and at the time that I was putting this together, that was the last figures that they had. I want you to notice the high increase. This is before COVID even came around. You know, when you're looking at this, you know, when you look at 2020, why was there heightened concern? Obviously, some of the things that had concern, China recorded only 81,000 cases, okay, during that first season, but obviously that may be due to their reporting statistics. And here's a chart here that gives you all the reporting and things of that nature that happen, and China is not hardly listed up there at all. But here it is 3 years later. We know some of the brethren here cannot come together here today because they got COVID, still around. You know, the problem with that particular disease is you can be a carrier without showing any symptoms. And by the time there's symptoms, you already spread it, okay? And so, and especially, it's affecting especially those that have a compromised immune system, the elderly and things of that nature. And somehow, if we don't manage this, it's going to become even worse. But what I want to share with you this evening as we evaluate the last 3 years, why is this happening? You look at COVID, why? You know, why all these type of things? Well, you know, when you look at the Bible, in Matthew 24 and verse 3, there was a question that the disciples asked Jesus. And what was the question? What shall be the sign of thy coming and of the end of the world? So what were they concerned with? What was the concern that the disciples had? What was it? The coming of Christ and what? End of the world, right? And we all get excited when we talk about signs of the last days, and everybody wants to hear more about signs of the last days. But I want you to pay attention to the answer of Jesus. This is in verse 3. The question is what? What are the signs, right? And in the context, okay, what shall be the sign of the coming? So what is the sign of the coming, and what else? And the end of the world. And did you ever, I don't know if you ever paid attention to Jesus' answer. You know, we go through all the things, we talk about the signs, we talk about the events and everything else, but I want you to look at this. In the next verse, Jesus says, take heed that no man be deceived. In other words, when we're talking about the signs of the last days, the biggest problem we're going to find is that people are getting deceived about the signs of the last days. The biggest problem is deception. Being deceived. Why? What is Satan trying to do? What has Satan been trying to do in the last 3 years? What was his target? What was he trying to accomplish? In verse 24 it says what? There shall arise false Christs and false prophets and show great signs and wonders, insomuch that if it were possible, they shall deceive the elect. What is Satan trying to do in these last days? Deceive the very elect. And for that reason, Jesus says what? Be not deceived. Don't jump on everything. Don't get excited about every little thing. Be careful with that. And I want you to look and see what happens. You know, when you look at the global economy and everything else, it started with COVID and everybody, no more going to work and all these kind of things. And then you think, oh, COVID's coming to an end. And then there is what? War. That is not. War in Ukraine is not the first war. There's been wars all over Africa constantly. There's still, in Sudan, they're still fighting over there. Everywhere there's a lot of wars, but it doesn't affect us as much except what? The war in Ukraine, with all the sanctions and everything else, it started suddenly affecting us. And ye shall hear of wars and rumors of wars. See that ye be not troubled, for all these things must come to pass. And I want you to pay attention to something. What does it say next? But the end is not yet. It's not over. And then it goes on. For nation shall rise against nation, kingdom against kingdom. You know, these nations, they're eager for fighting. You know, the United States saying, oh, we're not going over to Ukraine. We're not going to fight. Oh, please. Making money on Ukraine right now. Sending all the missiles and everything else over there. They're making a killing on it. Okay, they're eager for war. They're eager for these type of things, okay? All these nations, and the Bible says, nation shall rise against nation. They want to go to fight. And if there's nobody to fight, they'll go fight each other. And then goes on. And there shall be famines. Oftentimes related to war is what? Famines. And there is something called what? Pestilence, earthquakes, and diverse places. What's a pestilence? What's a pestilence? Plagues. Pandemics. You think COVID was something? You haven't seen anything yet. This is nothing yet. I want you to look and see what Satan's trying to do. While appearing to the children of men as a great physician. So Satan is trying to go out there, show you that he is a great physician. He is this scientist to help you. And then they tell us, trust science. Be serious. I trust science, but not that science. Okay? Look, as a great physician who can heal their maladies, he will do what? He will bring disease and disaster until populous cities are reduced to ruin and desolation. And you know, when we're dealing with this COVID, you know, my wife keeps saying, man, it's like somebody's going out there and sowing this thing. You know, there's a camp meeting. We better go sow it over there. So I said, no, nobody sows anything. But he imparts to the air a deadly taint, and thousands perish by the pestilence. What's a pestilence? Infectious diseases. Yeah, Satan is going out there. And when we say Satan, You study Bible, you study prophecy. When it says the dragon, it's Satan, but the dragon uses what? He uses people. He uses nations. And they go out there and they sow. Suddenly, everything is calm, everything is there, and all of a sudden, an outcrop of COVID somewhere. How did it get there? We got to understand something. We're dealing with something serious. And here in these last days, we can expect more and more pestilences to take place. But you know what? The end is not yet. Why? In Matthew it says what? All these are the beginnings of sorrows. This is all just the beginning. And you know, in the midst of all of this, we have this passage we got to struggle with. We know that all things what? Work together for good to them that love God. That doesn't make sense. You know, COVID comes over here. Somebody gets sick, they go to the hospital and die. How do you understand all things work together for good? Do we understand that in this time frame? You know, this passage becomes complicated. It's good from a theoretical perspective until you're the one dying. Your husband, your wife is dying, your friend is dying. What then? We had some people die. I had some of my friends die. They're just a year or two older than me. I went for their funeral. They died of COVID. He wasn't expecting anything. He was out working as normal. He got his feet wet. He was in the rain. And he got a little chill and he thought, okay, I got a little chill. And he waited for 5 days. And after 5 days, he said, you know what, this is something more than a chill. And that night he told his wife, he says, look, I need to go to the hospital or this is my last day. So I took him to the hospital. Didn't make any difference. It was still his last day. Went to the hospital, went into a coma, and a month or two, whatever it was, later, he was gone. He never came out of the coma. And then we say all things work together for good to them that love God. You know, when somebody dies, we ask why. Isn't that what we ask all the time? Why? You see, when we're looking at this type of environment, it's time for us to understand the passage, Romans 1:17, the just shall live by faith. It's a hard time. That's when you have to start walking by faith, because before that, it's, you know, right now we're looking at things, we're looking at everywhere, comfortable with things, but when something like that happens, that's the time to walk by faith. You know, I just want to share a little bit here about the experience of Jesus. It says the Father's presence encircled Christ, and nothing befell him but that which infinite love permitted for what? For the blessing of the world. Let's stop and think about this. All experiences and circumstances are God's workman whereby good is brought to us. Do we believe that? It's hard to believe that when something challenging is happening. I mean, just stop and think. Jesus is going through things, and then Jesus died. What happened to Jesus? He died. That was not an easy thing. What if people prayed so much and prayed to God that Jesus does not die? To the disciples, that would have made sense. But what happens if Jesus did not die? What would have happened? You have to understand something. When we are praying, healing and protection is not always our goal. Did you know that? We think that when we're praying, we have to have healing. If the disciples all gathered together and prayed that Christ does not die on the cross, what would have happened?
He would have survived, we would be lost.
That's the point. And so that prayer actually was the wrong prayer. Jesus actually had to go and had to die. The question is not whether we are healed, whether we live. The question is, are you ready to die? Oftentimes I've been called to the hospital bed of a person in the hospital. They're praying for him to be healed. And I come there and I see the person. And I have a question for them that people get a little bit rattled over. I have a question. I said to this one brother, I said, brother, I see you're here in the hospital, you're suffering. I asked him, are you ready to die? He says, but I'm not going to die. God's going to heal me. I said, yeah, that may happen. But are you ready to die? Before the week was over, he had died. But the conversation I had with him was very profitable because he was ready to die. I went to visit another brother. He was not even in the church anymore. He used to be a worker. He had left the church for different reasons. I happened to be visiting his area and I come there to visit him. They're telling me about God's miraculous healing and I'm looking, this guy is just about dead. And I had to ask him the question, are you ready to die? I had to lead him to the foot of the cross that day, that evening. And you know, he decided to get baptized. I made sure that everything was correct. There were some issues that he had done beforehand. I called the field where he used to live in to make sure everything was settled with all of them. I made sure all that was done. And then I had to leave, but Brother Devai was coming there that Wednesday. I left Sunday night, and Wednesday he was baptized. His son refused to come, saying, no, I don't need to come there because my dad, God's going to do a miracle. Friday he passed away. He was ready to die. Some cases, we see miracles and people walk. That's okay. But we have to be what? Ready to die. You know, many times as we look at God, we look at His ways. And God says, my thoughts are not your thoughts. I don't think like you. I don't act like you. It's something completely different. So what is God's purpose in all of these things? It says we shall be subject to heavy trials, opposition, bereavement, affliction. But we know that Jesus passed through all of these. Jesus went through everything. It says these experiences are valuable to us. The advantages of varying experiences are not by any means confined to this short life. They reach into eternal ages. Through patience, faith, and hope in all the changing scenes of earth, we are doing what? We are forming characters. We are forming characters for the everlasting life. In all these experiences that we go through, we are forming a character. One time we had a brother. I was inviting him into work for many years. He used to be a worker. And he said, oh, I got to do something still and something there. I told him one day, I said, listen, you need to hurry up with your decision because, don't wait until you have 1 foot in the grave and 1 foot in a banana skin. Eventually, he came back into the work. He wasn't into work 2 years. And he was in the hospital. I went to visit him in the hospital. Said, how are you doing? He says, well, 1 foot's in the grave and 1 foot's in the banana skin. He had a brain tumor. He never recovered. He died. What he never saw was that his son gave his heart to the Lord finally after his father died. And today his son is a worker. You see, we're looking from a human perspective. We want to live, but sometimes we need to die. I want to look at this experience here for a moment. It's in the northern kingdom of Israel. The southern kingdom of Israel. The northern kingdom was in great apostasy. You remember Ahab? You remember Ahab? Jezebel, you know those names? In the southern kingdom, there was a man named Asa. He was a king. And he did what? What did he do? That which is good in the sight of the Lord. And now, this man who was doing good in the sight of the Lord, it says in Chronicles, and there came out against them Zerah, the Ethiopian, with a host of 1,000 and 300 chariots, and came to Marisha. Here is a king. The northern kingdom is being left alone. They're in wickedness. And Asa, who is doing right, ends up with this entire army. Now what happens? I want you to think for a moment. The two armies are meeting together. Asa's army is looking at this huge army. What is going through the mind of Asa and the people of Judah? When they're facing this, and this is an important lesson for us here. Here is this army that we're facing. What do you think is going through their mind? What do you think is their first question? You know what their first question is? It's not deliverance. Did you know deliverance was the second question? Pictures from prophets, here's what it says. The opposing armies now stood face to face. It was a time of test and trial to those who served the Lord. And I want you to notice, what's the first question? Had every sin been confessed? And then, the next question is deliverance. But what's the first question? The army's there. What's the first question? Are all my sins confessed? That's the first question. When we are facing death, when we're facing all these challenging things around us, because like I said, COVID's not the last one. It's not goodbye to COVID. Okay? In 10 years from now, we may be looking back and thinking, wow, COVID was something easy. You read what we read already, right? It's going to get worse. When we face this, when you face COVID, and you get severely sick, or whatever disease, is your first question, have I confessed all my sins? Or is the first question, why, Lord? Why me? How many times we start with God with a list? God, I have done this and this and this and this for you. How come I got this disease? That's the wrong question. We got to understand what the right question is. The children of Judah, some of them may have gone out there to die. And their question was what? Have I confessed all my sins? That's the issue here. That's why the Bible says, examine yourselves. Whether you be in the faith. Are you in the faith? You know, COVID comes and what happens? A lot of people stop going to church. They're at home. They're comfortable being pajama reformers. Yeah, they're comfortable. You know, you get up in the morning, you stay in your pajamas, you just turn on the machine there, you can watch Sabbath school even. Everything's there. You don't even have to change. The question is, are we really examining ourselves? And some, they're not coming back to church. They're done. I've been to some places and churches are just empty. Oh, they're not coming back anymore. Why? Because we're asking the wrong questions when crisis happens. Right now, when the world is in turmoil, economically, we don't know what's going to happen next. When people are still getting sick of the pestilence, the President of the United States announced recently the pandemic is over. Is it over? People still getting sick? When our lives are turned upside down because of the restrictions, when it seemed that governments were clearly looking to see how easy it is to control its citizens, when liberty was yielded with hardly a protest, right now when it's possible that the world is in preparation for the ultimate control of humanity. It's a good practice for the governments. Right now, when all these things are happening, have we used these things as an opportunity to examine ourselves? Have we done a real, serious evaluation of our personal life's experience? Have you done that? See, that's the question. The deaths that have happened, they are not the last ones. Just had a hurricane in Florida. Our church in Orlando ended up going right through the line of the storm. A lot of people died. I didn't hear anybody in our church died, but it's possible sometimes that we die in a hurricane. And then what? Hurricane's coming. Are you going to save your life, or are you going to, first of all, examine your soul? Is the first thing we're going to do is examine ourselves. You know, the question there was what? When Asa and his army went to meet the foe, what did they do? First question was not, how can we get through this? First question was not, do we get victory? The first question was, had every sin been confessed? That's the first question. And what about us? Is that our great concern? You know, we're still in this world after 178 years have passed since the great disappointment. 178 years. Why are we still here? Revelation 7 tells us very clearly, why are we still here? Because the servants of God are still not sealed. You know, I hear a lot about how wonderful it was in the good old days. And a lot of people tell me how wonderful it was back in the 1950s or whatever else it was. Yeah, in America, the same thing. They say how much more spiritual people were in the 1950s in the United States. And all I can say is if they were so spiritual, we wouldn't be here. Yeah, if they were so spiritual, the work would have been finished and they would be gone. Okay? But we are still here for what reason? Because the work is not done yet. And each generation has received what? Something called failure. Every single generation so far. Are we going to be the next generation that receives another failure? And yes, 50 years from now, if we're still here, some of you who are here are going to remember the good old days when it was so much more spiritual. It's not going to be any different. Why? Because the servants of God are still not sealed. In other words, God's people are not ready. That's the key issue. God's people are not ready. And what God has done, He has given us a little bit more time. The reprieve that we have received a little bit in the last year or so. Of course, in the United States, some places where we live, we had reprieve a long time ago. But reprieve throughout the world is because God has given us a little bit more time. How often time do we think about the events? It says Satan invents a number of schemes to occupy our minds, that they may not dwell upon the very work with which we ought to be best acquainted. We need to be very acquainted with this work, and we are not paying attention. The arch deceiver hates the great truths that bring to view what? Notice here, the atoning sacrifice and an all-powerful mediator. He knows that with him everything depends on his diverting minds from Jesus and his truth. Notice here, the work of the atonement, the atoning sacrifice, and the all-powerful mediator. We need to spend more time thinking about these subjects. We need to be spending more time presenting these subjects to the people. Now, there are some issues that we need to seriously examine. You know, each of us are facing different kinds of attractions. It says here in volume 4 that Satan invents earthly allurements. What does he do? Things to attract us. That the carnal mind may be placed on the things which cannot elevate and refine and ennoble. So what is he doing? He is trying to get us on subjects that will distract us. Its powers are thus dwarfed and crippled, and men and women who might attain the perfection of character become narrow, weak, and defective. This is the problem of what we are facing here. Now, we talk about money. And the problem is not money. What's the problem? It's the love of money that becomes the root of all evil. This is the problem that we're facing here in society. You know, you look at the fever for financial gain. People are eagerly looking for money, how to make the most amount of money. It says they permit themselves to be drawn into the current which is sweeping man downward. And when Satan sees his plan work so well, he invents scheme after scheme that the Lord's money may be diverted into channels where the cause of God will get none of it. And listen how it works. Listen how it's done. Satan tells the speculator that if he will engage in this land scheme, he can make means to help the cause of God. Look, just do this, and you're going to make tons of money. And you can help God's cause. And what happens? Thousands of dollars are bound away from the cause of God. And this is what goes on. Oh, we're going to make a lot of it. I knew individuals who just kept telling me, oh, I can't get into work right now because I'm just about to make lots of money. And then I'm going to do it voluntarily, and I'm going to give more. He's been telling me that actually for 40 years. He's poor till today. Why? Satan got a hold of him on something like this. Another issue is morality. As the children of Israel were about to enter the promised land, it says, and Israel abode in Sittim, and the people began to commit whoredom with the daughters of Moab. Yeah, this was right at the border of the promised land. As we approach the close of time, as the people of God stand upon the borders of the heavenly Canaan, Satan will, as of old, redouble his efforts to prevent them from entering the goodly land. And he lays this snare for every soul. That's what he's doing. It is not the ignorant and uncultured merely that need to be guarded. He will prepare his temptations for those in the highest positions in the most holy office. If he can lead them to pollute their souls, he can, through them, destroy many. And he employs the same agents now as he employed 3,000 years ago. By worldly friendships, by the charms of beauty, by pleasure-seeking, mirth, feasting, or the wine cup, he tempts to the violation of the seventh commandment. That's what Satan's about. So some he can get by money schemes, others with immorality. You look at women, and women, it says here, Satan knows that women have a power of influence for good or evil. Therefore, he seeks to enlist them in his cause. Did you know that? Women have a very powerful influence, and they can influence for right or wrong. And this is why he invents multitudinous fashions. And he tempts women of the present day, as he did Eve, to pluck and eat, to adopt practices, these ever-changing, never-satisfying modes. Another thing is that Satan's trying to get people to live in the cities. Why? Because there's amusements. Things are very close in the cities. You can have everything close at hand. All of this is designed to get us to neglect prayer and the searching of the scriptures. Because if we do that, we're going to overcome his attacks. Therefore, he invites every possible device to engross the mind. And some people don't get involved in any of those things. But there's ever been a class professing godliness who, instead of following on to know the truth, make it their religion to seek some fault of character or error of faith in those with whom they do not agree. Causing dissensions in the church, yes. And such are Satan's what? What are they? His right hand. Yeah, we can be good church members, and we are Satan's right hand. And so you see, the Lord allows these things to happen. Events to happen that shake us up so that we can do what? Examine ourselves. That's the whole purpose. All these things are for us to examine. And so instead of taking our time to follow all these other things, it's time for us to bring into captivity every thought to the obedience of Christ. There are opportunities and advantages which are within the reach of all to strengthen the moral and the spiritual powers. The mind can be expanded and ennobled and should be made to dwell upon heavenly things. Why? Right now, when you're in lockdown and you couldn't go out of your house for a while, what did you do? Did you take that opportunity to become established in the faith? To study the truths, to know them very well, to know what you believe and why? Have we taken that opportunity? Because to be established in the present truth, according to John 14:6, it said Jesus is the truth. To be established in the present truth means you're established in who? In Jesus Christ. And when you're established in Jesus Christ, it says here, there is one safeguard against Satan's deceptions and snares. That is the truth, as it is in Jesus. The truth planted in the heart, nourished by watchfulness and prayer, nourished by the grace of Christ, will give us discernment. The truth must abide in the heart, be felt in its power in spite of all the alluring enchantments of Satan. And your experience in mind must be that the truth can purify, guide, and bless the soul. So when people have to remain at home and practice social distancing, during that time, what were you doing? What were you doing when can't go to work, can't do all these things? What were you doing? During this time, were you taking time to examine yourself? To see whether you're in the faith? When you got sick? No. You know, I was working, I was going through all sorts of places and whatnot, and didn't get COVID for a long time. Year went by, I still didn't get COVID. I was still visiting people, doing all that stuff. I knew it was going to come one day. I figured, okay, one day it's going to come. Okay, but I'm not going to sit and hide until it does. And last February, it was the Delta one. It was during the time Delta was around, and whatever I got, it came with a venom. Oh, it came pretty hard. Okay, it hit me like a ton of bricks. What do you do then? Do you take time to examine yourself? Or do you moan and groan about everything else? Now, I took the natural remedies. I quickly went around. I did my natural remedies immediately. The first whiff of the fact that something was wrong here. I wasn't sure what was wrong yet, but I knew something was wrong. Something's coming up here. We have a sauna, we have Clonix, we have all that stuff. I went there immediately, took care of all that stuff. You know, did all the treatments that I knew. Stop eating as normal. You know, you stop putting food in. You know, do all the other stuff. And at the same time, it's an opportunity to do what? Examine yourself. And suppose I'm to die. I have to sit there and think, man, what happens if I die? I don't want to die. I mean, that's not what I'm here for. I want to live, okay? You know, I see people that, someday 90 years old, they die, and it's like, it's getting close. I got a lot more to work beside 90, okay? I got more things to do. I don't want to die, okay? But I have to be ready. What happens if this is it? This is it. This is my time. You see, whenever these things happen, are we examining ourselves? When there's a flood, when there's a fire, when there's a hurricane, when there's a loss, are you taking time to examine yourself? Or is your first question, why God? Why me? That's the issue. We look at Hezekiah, he says, why me? I've been so faithful. Do we realize what we're saying? During that time where you're taking opportunity to search the scriptures to fortify your mind for the unknown days ahead. I'm not talking about the first few days of COVID. That thing was rough, okay? I could barely get up, okay? I remember talking to Walter, and he was looking forward to COVID. He can sit there and do research and everything else, when COVID came. Never knew how heavy a book was, eh? Yeah, that was a real strange thing. All your plans to research and everything else. After about a week, okay, then you can probably do some of these things. But until then, we got to understand something, that God loves you and me. And because God loves you and me, you know what He has done? He is giving us opportunities. These events that we are seeing, these crises, are an opportunity knocking at our door. And the Lord's saying, it's time to examine ourselves. I think it's quite appropriate for us at this juncture for our closing hymn. Who at my door is standing? Okay, sure. Okay. But let me just finish this. I want you to stop and think here. The words here, who at my door is standing? Patiently drawing near, entrance within demanding. Whose is the voice I hear? Sweetly the tones are falling. Open the door for me. If thou wilt heed my calling, I will abide with thee. The Lord is calling each of us this evening to open that door. And in the future, when all these pestilences come with even more force, that we will be prepared to use every tragic situation as an opportunity to examine our hearts. Amen.